Dear hunter, someone is walking from the horizon of the wilderness. I have no idea if he's a reaver, a wanderer, a hunter, a bum, or a devil. What do I do in this situation? The hunter replies, just shoot first. After a brief pause, he explains, attack is the best defense. Can't give it to ya. I know that times have become weird, but you must have lost your intellect. In this case, the only reason you're not giving it to me is because you don't want to. It's not because you can't. I had a lot of chips when I came to you with my request. But I've used them all up since then. We wouldn't be in this situation if you'd been faster at fulfilling the request. The man's attitude had completely changed from their previous meeting as he gazed indifferently at the pile of monster ears Zin had brought. Not even 4 days ago, he'd been begging Zin to the point of kissing his ass, but now, after Zin had taken care of the troublesome group of beasts, he was acting as if nothing had happened, unwilling to pay up. If I recall, a pay cut based on time of completion wasn't part of the deal. Well, that depends. Anyway, I have no more chips. Can't give to you what I don't have. This might be some rural area, in a town somewhere in the boonies, but you do realize that not paying a hunter for his work isn't exactly the smartest thing to do. The man laughed off his warning. Here, you might be a devil hunter and not a regular one, but I can't give you what's no longer there. And if you've been hunting down beasts, you've probably got enough chips as rewards. So why don't you just quietly let this go? Suddenly, the man stared at Zin with a different look on his face. It wasn't the look of a person who couldn't pay because he was out of money. That is, if you wanna get back safe with whatever chips you got. I think you're misunderstanding something here. Zin didn't even flinch at the man's threat. The amount of chips that you owe me is not the point. Zin continued to speak as his face hardened. It's the fact that someone won't pay a hunter his due, that's the point. Someone who didn't want to pay. Someone who needed to get paid. This never-ending feud had been ongoing since the apocalypse. The town leader, who possessed more than 20 guns, was trying to avoid paying Zin at all costs. And therefore, he played his last card. Reaching under the table, he slowly pulled out an object. Zin watched with amusement. He cocked it. Click. You realize what this is? A gun. The man looked leisurely at Zin as if he'd gained the upper hand. Zin stayed still. Walk away, won't you? Here. The man smirked before he could murmur, before I shoot. But Zin gave a big sigh. There was no need for him to pay attention to the man's gun. Doc. Zin grimaced. Instead of getting angry, he looked even more dumbfounded and annoyed. Do you even know what a gun is? Of course. This thing can take care of anybody in one shot. Hunters are no exception. Look, first of all, you're holding it wrong. The man was holding the gun on the slide instead of the grip. A person would only end up smacking someone with the grip if they held it in such a manner. Plus, your fancy gun doesn't even have a trigger. The gun only had a trigger guard. The man didn't even know how to use a gun. And there's no magazine. The semi-automatic didn't have a magazine attached. Zin felt annoyed that he had to explain all of this, and that the man was threatening him. However, the man still looked confident. You think you're all that, Mr. Hunter, but do you know how many people have died because of this gun? It was as if the man believed that he could have his way by using a gun without a magazine. He probably rose up as the town's leader with this gun. Zin started explaining some obvious facts. Hey, guns need magazines to be effective. A gun by itself is worthless. The man laughed again. Not once have I heard of a gun that needed paper magazines. The man had no idea what a magazine was and that a gun needed ammunition. Zin was starting to get tired of the whole situation. Do you think a hunter has no idea what a gun is? The world had become a strange place where even fools were trying to fool a hunter. Breathing out another sigh, Zin pulled out his silver revolver. There was no more time to waste. Guns are not for show. Wah, what? They're for shooting. Bang. A shot fired off from the muzzle. Ugh. The man screamed. Just missed it. The man felt the bullet whistle right past his ear, and he soon realized what a gun could do. It's the real deal. If the bullet had gone a fraction of an inch toward his face, he wouldn't even be screaming in the first place. Realizing who he was fooling around with, the man lay flat on the ground. Oh my, Mr. Hunter, I'm so sorry. Enough. Get me the chips. Right here. And give me that as well. Yay. Yes. Sin disassembled the semi-automatic and threw it away before another fool decided to mess with the gun. The man ran to the storage room and brought back 80 blue chips as compensation. After counting the chips, Sin waved at the man. Yay. Yes. Do you need me for something? This applies to rogue clients like yourself, so let's revise our agreement for further compensation. What? I'm charging you an additional 20 chips for unnecessary stress. What? Another 20 for overtime since you didn't tell me the exact location of the beasts. What in the world? Another 40 since there were about 30% more beasts than you initially mentioned. No, another 10 since the rain on my way back really fouled up my mood. What? So that's an additional 90 chips. Plus 40 chips for ammo, so you owe me 130 chips on top. Sin's request was out of the norm. And the man started to complain. Click. Sin aimed at the man and whispered to him. The bullet or your head? Do you want to find out which one's tougher? Ha, ha ha. After collecting an additional 130 chips on top of the 80 chips, Sin talked calmly to the man who had no more chips. Don't cheat a hunter out of his compensation, unless you want to get into additional negotiations. A hunter's negotiation was not a negotiation. Had the man given the promised 80 chips, things wouldn't have turned out this way, but there was no point in regretting it now. From the man's perspective, he was lucky to have walked away with his life even after threatening the hunter. Feeling unbalanced, the man watched Sin walk away. He then looked at the disassembled semi-automatic. So, we need paper magazines to use guns. It appeared as if the fool had a long way to go. Because of the sudden gunshot, the townspeople were now eyeing Sin. They were all nervous since this was probably the first time any of them had heard a gunshot. They didn't know what was going on. So they hid themselves from the hunter. Whatever the reason, it didn't really matter to Sin, who had already pocketed his reward. Sin sighed as he left the small town. The townspeople who were scared of the fake gun were probably living as slaves, and that man had thought that the fake gun's power was real. It's still a world of fools. Sin walked and read messages that started to pop up in front of his eyes. Darkborn energy 0.32%. All non-vital functions are inactive. Remaining energy level 392 days 2 hours 32 seconds. Devil's blood is needed. Sin would stop functioning when he consumed all his energy. However, Sin knew better than anyone that there were no more devils in this world. Out of the 210 blue chips that he earned, Sin consumed 100 of them. A normal person wouldn't dare to do something so insane, but Sin ate the chips like a snack. Alternative energy consumption, 100 chips. Uptime increased, 100 H for every chip consumed, 1 hour of life was extended. The uptime estimation was based on the level of darkborn energy, and when a potent amount of force was used, one's lifetime decreased. Alternative energy has low efficiency. Please search for the devil's blood. Sin looked at the warning message and sighed. 100 years ago, the world's last devil was hunted down. 211 years had passed since the apocalypse. It was still a world of fools, and Sin was no different since he was living as a devil hunter in a world without devils. After the apocalypse, people wanted tall and thick walls around their homes. And so towns grew bigger with taller walls. However, in a world where technology had vanished, construction was difficult to carry out, resulting in brittle trash walls built up from stones and rocks. The world's tallest and strongest wall was built before the apocalypse. However, life before the apocalypse hadn't required any walls. Therefore, building walls hadn't been a common practice. However, no matter how uncommon the practice, there were places where the humans needed tall and thick walls. And one of those places was the prison. Prisons that housed many INM.Atis were the perfect shelters for humans who lived in fear of beasts. The prison cells were small and adjacent to each other, which allowed many people to live them. The prisons also had tall watchtowers that allowed them to easily spot any external threats. Weapons were stored in the prisons to attack and defend against beasts. Therefore, all prisons, or at least the ones with tall and thick walls, were the best dwelling places. Obviously, the weapons became unusable over a period of time, but even after 200 years, the prisons became suitable habitations with tall walls and safe cells. The original purpose of a prison was to prevent someone from getting out, but now a prison became a place to prevent others from coming in. So this is the odd point. Sin stared at the tall wall in front of his eyes. Who's there? The guards who spotted the approaching Zin showed up at the top of the wall. All of them had an arrow aimed at Zin. Looking at the bowstrings stretched to their limits, Zin felt weird. 100 years ago, when guns and ammunitions were readily available, people at the top of the wall would have patrolled with their guns. From machine guns and sniper rifles to rifles. From rifles to submachine guns, from submachine guns to pistols, from pistols to bow guns. And now, there were arrows. Sin wondered how much further their weapons would degrade. He thought perhaps slings and slingshots would be used next. Now, technology was degenerating instead of developing. As Zin realized how times have changed, he also realized that he'd lived for far too long. I'm a hunter. Whether it was a town, security point, fortress or castle, there were two types of attitude towards a hunter, unwelcoming or welcoming. A hunter and a reaver were not too different in that they both killed humans and beasts. The only difference was that reavers killed without reason, whereas hunters received chips to kill either humans or beasts. If a hunter was needed, a hunter would be welcomed, meaning that there were possible requests. If a town had no issues, the townspeople would not be so welcoming towards a hunter, who was essentially a stranger. Come on in. The guard's words suggested that there were possible requests for a hunter. Creak. The rusted steel door made a creaking sound as it opened, and Zin walked inside past the door. The two doormen were watching Zin alertly. The guards were armed with machetes and wooden spears, and they drew their weapons at Zin. No need to be hostile here. It's his loss if he starts a commotion. A man came down from the wall. And at his words everyone else withdrew their weapons. The men were poorly equipped, but were organized. The man came and stretched out a hand to Zin. I am Back-Go, and I am the captain of the guard at Ardpoint. I'm Zin. Quite an interesting name you have. The same goes for you. Huh, is that so? Before the apocalypse, people used to name their dogs Back-Go. Instead of being annoyed by Zin's words, Back-Go started to laugh. Haha, yeah, my father used to beat me like a dog. Zin chuckled at his reaction. The captain of the guard of Ardpoint seemed to be a person with a sense of humor, which was a trait rarely seen in these times. I was trying to piss you off intentionally, but anyway, my apologies. It's alright. That's how hunters are like. Back-Go walked away and gestured to Zin. We are in need of help, so we can tolerate such discourtesy. Back-Go started walking into the prison building, and Zin followed suit. Inside the Ardpoint prison was a garden, taken care of by people who seemed to be residents. Quite a lively community. Every village had its own lifestyle, but in this place, looking at the guards and those farming food, it seemed that the community had chosen to produce and distribute food as a community as well. Zin estimated that at least 200 or 300 people currently resided in Ardpoint. In a village where a community was formed, the leader had the most power, and each community had its own strengths and weaknesses. Of course, Zin had seen many cases where the weaknesses were visibly magnified. However, he did not notice any signs of pain or exhaustion from the people. Looks like a pretty good community. We've got beasts that are edible, and they haven't been attacking us these days. It's great here. Well, that's good to hear. Hunting beasts that weren't poisonous was one way to gain food. However, there was no use hunting the undead and the poisonous beasts. Those were only hunted to extract chips. Who's the boss here? Our leader. Are you talking about our elder? He's an old man, but wiser than anybody else. We were able to go through rough times because of the elder's wisdom. In every village, the leaders would be called by different titles, and in this place, it seemed that the leader was referred to as the elder. From Zin's perspective, Ardpoint seemed to be an ordinary place. However, Zin fell into deep thought. This is troublesome. It was clear that the village had some troubling matters. It was usually some direct threat like hunger, attacks from the beasts, or the Reavers' raids. These types of issues had to be dealt with right away without much thought. Judging from its exterior appearance, this village seemed to be trouble-free. However, the fact that this type of village was in need of a hunter meant that there was a big underlying problem. Based on Zin's experience, peaceful-looking villages usually made dangerous and strange requests. Bakgu said, "The elder may not ask you for help, so don't expect too much." He won't. Yeah. Bakgu himself also looked puzzled. So far, 5 hunters have come by. But none of them received a request. That's interesting to hear. Honestly, I'm not even sure what kind of person the elder wants. Bakgu started telling Zin about the elder's strange behavior. Out of nowhere, the elder said that a hunter was needed, and when a hunter visited, he would reject them every time. Without giving a specific reason, he would reject the hunter. He would then tell them to search for new hunters, but would always ask the visiting hunter to leave after a night's stay. So, you can assume that you'll get a night's rest if you don't receive a request. Well, whatever happens, I have nothing to lose. Getting a night's rest in a safe place was a pretty sweet deal, and even though the leader seemed odd, Zin had nothing to lose. The leader's room used to be one of the jailer's rooms, and as usual, the leader's room was on the top floor. Here comes the hunter. Alright, I see him coming. The leader was an elderly man. And although his face was full of liver spots, his voice was firm, and he did not appear feeble. The elder scanned Zin slowly, as if he was trying to get a sense of Zin's past life. He'd met 5 hunters, and rejected them all. It might have been for no reason, or perhaps he was justified in doing so. As soon as the elder finished scanning Zin, he nodded slowly. Yes, he is the one. Well done. Bakgu. Is that so? Yes. You are dismissed. Yes, sir. Bakgu wondered what the elder could have possibly found after a quick glance. He didn't quite get it. But he followed the elder's order. He walked down, and Zin, standing still, watched the elder. It's good to meet a great person in such unfortunate times. Zin shrugged at his words. It doesn't look that unfortunate around here. The greatest misfortunes are hidden behind the shadows. I agree. Anyway, first off, I'd like you to tell me how I'm different from the first 5 hunters. The first 5 were not chosen, but Zin was chosen. The elder started laughing. The 5 hunters were all fakes. They were wannabe losers. However, you are the real deal. How can you be so sure of that? The elder raised his hand, and pointed at Zin's black trench coat. The real hunters wear outfits that can hide a lot of stuff inside. Interesting observation. The sound of steel meeting steel. The faint smell of gunpowder. This is a proof that you're the real deal. Zin's trench coat had plenty of space to hide things like a sharpened sword or gun. In a short period of time, the elder had picked up clues from Zin's appearance, and knew that Zin carried a gun. The elder was no ordinary client, and it was impressive that he identified the gunpowder smell so quickly. Zin asked, "Were you a hunter before?" "I was in a hunter's nest for quite a bit. I have good instincts. Looks like I ran into a tricky client. I will take that as a compliment." ACL. Ayant, who understood the physiology of a hunter, was a tough client. The elder laughed as Zin asked again, "Shall we talk about your request?" As soon as Zin asked, the elder's face hardened, and he started to speak. "Towards the sun setting west, there is a city that's a 4-day walk away. Do you know about it?" If I remember correctly, it's the city of Zado, isn't it?" "Correct. So, you know about it. As the leader of Ardpoint, what do you have to do with the city?" "Some time ago, Zado city was destroyed. Our merchant told me about the news." Zin grimaced. The average number of residents in a city could be as small as 300, and sometimes as many as 1,000. It was unusual for a city to be so easily destroyed. There were 2 cases when a city would get destroyed. Either from the beasts' attacks or a Reavers raid. Was there a raid from a massive slaughterhouse? No. It was caused by the beasts. He said that it couldn't have been done by humans. There are no beasts capable of destroying such a city in the region of ancient Korea. Yes, that's what I'm thinking. Ancient Korea, the Korean peninsula, was on the outskirts, and there was no group of beasts or elite beasts capable of taking down a city. From that perspective, ancient Korea was a good region to live in. The elder knew about that fact, and was perplexed. If there's a beast capable of destroying a city, this place is no longer safe. True. However, without knowing exactly what's going on, we can't migrate so easily. Obviously, wandering outside is not a smart thing to do. For that reason, the elder had waited for a hunter. The village's guard was just a guard, and didn't have the same skill sets as a professional hunter. Guards simply fought. However, hunters observed, listened, laid low, fought, and pursued. A hunter was best suited for this type of task. I would like you to investigate what beast attacked the city of Zado and whether it's dangerous enough that we'll need to migrate. If you can bring some convincing proof, that will be even better. The elder did not expect a single hunter to defeat a beast that had taken down a whole city. Therefore, the hunter was given a surveillance request, not a hunt request. There were many hunters who failed to fulfill this type of requests with diligence. For that reason, the elder had looked for a trustworthy hunter, not a fake, but a true hunter. If Zin confirmed that the group of beasts that destroyed Zado city was dangerous, then the residents of Ardpoint would have to leave for a new place. The request might have been a simple one, but it came with great risk. However, Zin thought that the request was worth accepting. It was a simple, yet strange one. This type of request usually netted Zin with great returns. It was worth it, especially if it involved a fallen city. If a city had been destroyed, the city's blue chips would have no owners. Even without a hunter request, it was worth going to the city. And the reward from completing the request would just be a bonus. First, let's talk about payment. Advance payment of 100. I'll pay up 100 after completion. Depending on how trustworthy you are, I will pay an additional 100. That's pretty generous. I am asking for that much diligence in return. 300 blue chips was a large amount, enough to maintain the point's energy level for about a month. It was not an amount that a small town's leader or the fool would have in possession. Considering that most beast hunting requests paid 1 to 3 chips per beast, it was a large amount. As a surveillance request, the pay was high, and the elder considered the request as an important deal. Alright, I'll do it. Sin nodded as it was a very good request that wouldn't need further negotiation. The elder gave him the advance payment, and Zin accepted it. More often than not, people who faked being hunters would receive the advance payment and run away. It was pretty common to see requests without a prepayment. Those who did advance payments of 100 chips were divided into two groups, the dumb ones or the ones with great instincts. Sin thought that he was the latter. You told me that you were in a hunter's nest before. Where is that? A nest called Lightning Bird. I see. Sin nodded and then stood up. Okay, I'll leave tomorrow. You'll have to wait about a week. It's probably a dangerous beast, so don't think about fighting it. That's for me, a hunter, to decide. Haha, well, probably. As Zin walked out of the elder's room, he tried to remember a nest named Lightning Bird. He tried to imagine how the elder would have looked as a young hunter. Images popped up and faded away. I've been through a lot. Sin grimaced yet again. Sin moved into one of the prison cells after getting guidance from Bakgu. It was a small cell, but it was hard to get a safer place than this. Are you okay with potatoes as a meal? Thanks. Bakgu walked away somewhere, and brought back 3 steamed potatoes. Surprisingly, hunters can get picky. I remember some of them used to ask for meat. Bakgu grumbling, as if referring to the 5 hunters who'd come previously. Sin smiled. I think we have a misunderstanding here. Misunderstanding. Hunters who seek meat are not hunters. Some people hate meat. For the residents, meat was hard to come by. But hunters ate too much meat. Since hunters wandered outside for a long period time, they would usually get sick of eating meat. Bakgu nodded slowly as if he'd realized something. Now that I've listened to you, it makes sense. Does that mean that those who seek meat are fakers? Very possible. Good. I'm learning something good today. I'll remember this. Bakgu murmured the phrase, meat-seeking hunters are fake. Sin felt amused by Bakgu's actions. Some people still tried to learn and memorize new things. Bakgu seemed to have nothing to do in particular and sat next to Zin, who was eating the potatoes. Hey, about that Zado city, anything you want to tell me? I think the wolves did it. Zin's face hardened. Wolves. The most fearsome beast is probably the giant wolf. I think those beasts formed packs and attacked Zado city. I asked about the merchant, and he said that the corpses were ripped apart as if something had gnawed on them. Sorry to interrupt you, but giant wolves act solo and they don't form packs. For that reason, Bakgu's assumption was incorrect. However, Bakgu shook his head. I know. I hunted a giant wolf myself before. I did it by using a trick. Sin was surprised at Bakgu's comment. A giant wolf was a beast over 10 feet in size, not quite a large-sized beast, but big enough to be categorized as a mid-sized beast. To Zin, it was surprising to hear a guard say that he'd hunted a giant wolf before. And Bakgu wasn't bluffing either. Zin asked, a trick? It's a hunting trick that I developed. You know that giant wolves protect their own territory, right? If I provoked a wolf into following me to another wolf's territory, the one whose territory got invaded will rush out to fight off the invader. Both wolves will fight until one dies. And at that moment, I'll have to finish off the one that's exhausted. Once, when we were short of food, I desperately pulled off this trick to get meat. Wow, Zin nodded slowly. He was surprised that Bakgu had come up with such a hunting method himself. The method was not that of a guard or a warrior. It was a hunter's method. It was surprising that he'd thought about it without learning how to hunt. Hunting without getting injured was the best hunting method, and Bakgu had figured it out. And thought that Bakgu should be proud of himself. But anyway, here's the important part. What is it? I think this is the devil's deed. Sin felt deflated by his never-ending talk. Excited, Bakgu kept on yapping. What other monster would make solitary giant wolves form a pack? The only monster that can make a group of beasts form into a pack is a devil. I'm certain about this. I'm sure that the devil brought the pack of giant wolves to Zado City and wiped it out. You sure know some random things. Sin was speechless to the point of amazement. It was surprising how a guard from the boonies could be so misinformed about the devil. Sin thought it was problematic that Bakgu believed that the giant wolves had formed a pack because the devil was involved. I always ask around whenever a stranger visits, and I've learned quite a bit after listening to others. Don't you think that my theory makes sense? Looking at Bakgu, who firmly believed that the devil was behind it all, Zin shook his head. Hey, Bakgu, do you even know what a devil is? Devil. A devil is a devil is a devil. What you're described is just one type of a devil. Since Zin was going to stay the night anyway, he thought that it would be okay to tell the naive Bakgu some stories. The term devil refers to all 7 groups of monsters. 7 groups. Aren't all devils the same? Yes. Bakgu was way too engaged in the topic, and Zin felt uncomfortable. But Zin continued. In the past, bringing up that name was a curse, but now it was just a thing of the past. Dragon, demon, vampire, phantom, immortal, alien, and witch. Bakgu was perplexed after hearing about the 7 devils. I don't know what's what, and I don't think I've heard about some of those before. Of course, Sin whispered in a low voice. None of them exist in this world anymore. They don't exist anymore. Yeah, Sin was whispering a world's secrets to the attentive listener while he ate. Dragons were put to sleep, demons were exorcised, vampires were burned to death, phantoms were cleansed, immortals were sealed, aliens were exiled, and witches were hunted. Sin decided to tell him this in order to explain the current status of this world. Bakgu wasn't smart enough to understand the meaning of Zin's words. Sin stared at Bakgu and said, therefore, it cannot be the devil's deeds. Sin wasn't joking around, and Bakgu slowly nodded. Then what do you think destroyed the city of Zado? I'll have to go there to figure it out. But there's no chance that a devil is behind it. Bakgu nodded. You're not an ordinary hunter. My instincts are pretty accurate. Well, I don't think you're an ordinary guard, either. Ha, I'm just a fool. One who calls himself a fool is usually not a fool. Ha, whatever. Anyway, what were the special hunters called? What was it? Bakgu thought that the hunt in front of him might be the hunter that he kept on hearing about. It didn't take long for him to remember the name. That's right. I just remembered. Devil Hunter. You're a devil hunter. Bakgu started getting excited. Sin thought that this naive man didn't even understand what a devil hunter was about. If one knew about it, one would not be happy to meet one face to face. Sin didn't answer, and Bakgu, after talking for a while, asked again. You know what? What? You said that there are no more devils. That's right. Then why do we need a devil hunter? Well, why do we need a harvesting tool like a scythe? When there's no grain to harvest. Sin was amused at Bakgu's analogy. Why need a devil hunter in a devil-free world? There were scythes, but no grain to harvest. What was the use for that scythe in this world? The analogy was cheesy, but to the point. Well, Zin answered and added, I'm curious about that myself. What are you talking about? Bakgu sighed at this nonsense. And Zin smiled, amused. Then why are you wandering around? I'm trying to hunt down the devil, Zin answered. But you told me that there are no more devils. Yes, that's correct. You're sure that there aren't any more devils, but why are you looking for one? Zin pondered for a while, and answered calmly. I haven't really thought about it. Bakgu thought to himself, what sort of crazy man is this guy, and shook his head. Night came, and Zin was lying down on a comfortable blanket, staring at the ceiling of the cell. Because of the thick prison walls, he didn't have worry too much about potential threats. It was a great blessing not having to worry about staying alert all night long in the open wilderness. Quite a smart guy, Zin th. Or that Bakgu was a pretty sharp person. If he figured out a way to hunt effectively, he could become a skillful hunter later on. However, a great hunter was not necessarily a great person. Becoming a hunter wasn't a blessing. It was a hunter's destiny to die in the wilderness. It was probably much better living within the confinement of a wall. From the prison facility, the road to reach a hunter's nest with some sort of education system was quite far, and Zin had no intention of taking Bakgu there. After all, he was just another person that Zin had came across by chance. Zin knew that there was no point in clinging to such a relationship. Even though Bakgu's talents were overqualified as a guard, as a hunter, he would perish while confronting a beast that couldn't be hunted. More than anything, Zin was too fatigued to form a new relationship with another person. It was too much of a bother. When working on annoying tasks, even more bothersome things happened. This was one of Zin's adages that he lived by. Zin woke up and left early at dawn the next day. Bakgu got him a couple more potatoes, and Zin went his way, feeling refreshed by the hospitality which was rarely displayed by the people in this world. What a strange village. At Point, a village built from a prison facility, was a calm, yet strange village. Unless it were a freely traveling city, strangers were more likely to be ignored. But Zin did not get that impression during his stay at Ard Point. He wasn't necessarily welcomed, but the people looked peaceful. The elder took care of the people, and the people respected the elder. In Zin's point of view, out of the numerous cities and villages that he'd come across, Ard Point was a pretty good place to dwell. However, Zin knew one fact. A village that was too hospitable would end up destroyed sooner or later. There was a reason why people got rid of their feelings of generosity. Generosity was a weakness, and weakness meant danger. I will give them at most 10 years. Humans treated others cruelly not because they wanted to act that way, but because it was necessary in order to survive for a longer period of time. Humans used to search for ways to live longer. And it was no different these days. But, in order to survive in a world where civilization had disappeared, developing technologies was a thing of the past, and the only option left for humans was to be cruel. That was the answer to longevity, as well as a survival plan. Bang! Zin demonstrated this by sniping a stranger walking from far away. Zin slowly walked towards the dead body with his rifle strapped on his shoulder. The corpse was still, a bullet stuck deep in its forehead. There was not much difference between a hunter and a reaver. To be exact, all wanderers were the same. Besides oneself, everything was an enemy. One always attacked first before getting attacked. It was difficult to determine whether the opponent was an enemy or not. One would rather kill first and then think. If it was an innocent person, one would feel the bad aftertaste of killing someone innocent, but would be granted another day to live. Pretty lucky, Zin murmured as he looked at the cloudy, dark red blood stains on the corpse. The wanderer had suffered from an addiction to chaos poison. Man, was this guy in the process of becoming a beast? Watching the blood start to boil, Zin took out the flint from his coat. PZZZT. Zin created a fire, dropped it on the pool of blood, and then ran away from the corpse. Boom! Soon, a blazing fire exploded loudly. Zin rolled a couple of times forward from the shock of the explosion, and then stood up. As Zin dusted off his coat, he walked away from the explosion behind him. Gagha! A premature monster came out of the corpse, struggling and screaming, but Zin didn't look its way. In any case, those wandering the wilderness were hunters, robbers, reavers, vagabonds, and refugees. Aside from the refugees, the rest of them weren't innocent, and even then the refugees were far from being virtuous. Just now, the dead man had been a vagabond who could turn into a monster at any time. And Zin had kept himself safe by overpowering the opponent first. Still, there were 4 more days until his destination, a long way to go. A city was a village that was independently formed by people without a ruler. In order to support themselves, they focused on farming and commerce activities, most of the people involved in the latter. Therefore, a city was a place where a lot of wanderers stopped by, and was open to everybody. This large floating population allowed a city to grow bigger than any village. And in the city, food, lodging, water, weapons, and cheap alcohol could be bought with chips. Hunters always stopped by a city as it served as a pit stop for replenishment. However, the advantages came with disadvantages as well. Cities were unsafe, had weak security forces, and thus were easily attacked by beasts. In addition, the unmaintained streets were filled with abandoned corpses and the stench of rotting garbage. Epidemics swept the city from time to time, and nobody cared if a murder took place in the middle of the day. Having no control whatsoever meant that neglect and chaos would ensue. I am inside, yet outside. Hunters visiting a city would describe it in such a manner. The city was secluded from the beasts, yet dangers similar to the ones outside still existed. Hunters had to fend off the threat of thieves and gangs trying to mug them. Of course, if they were aware of how dangerous hunters could be, they wouldn't dare to attack, but in the ancient Korea region, where hunters were rare, there were sometimes ignorant people who didn't know about hunters. Just like how the outside was dangerous, the city was not much safer as different threats existed. To the hunters, a city was a type of dungeon. Until the hunter could discover the wanted goods and escape the dungeon, the hunter needed to take care of himself. But now, a city that had been metaphorically referred to as a dungeon had become an actual dungeon. Zin looked at the trash wall of the city from afar. The wall built from piles of trash was barely holding upright, and its height was low at about 12 feet. There were sharp objects in the wall, but they were easily avoidable. Grr. Within the city, beasts growled here and there. Among the different sounds, Zin heard a distinctive cry. A cry that sounded like the screech of rusted metal. Most of the cities were built on top of ruins, and Zado City was no different. Having trash walls was better than having nothing. And ruins were the best spot to find trash. Zado City was a relatively small city, but it was much larger than Ard Point. A city's ability to defend itself was inversely related to the size of the city. Zado City did not have the ability to defend itself because of its bigger size, and the consequences were present in front of Zin. Munch. Munch. Krrrrrr. Chomp. 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 Many beasts were feasting on a corpse. Ghouls, corpse-eating beasts and monsters, and poisonous canines had all gathered around it. Zin quietly watched the party of monsters. Beasts were animals. They would usually growl, but when they were eating, they didn't display any signs of aggression. Zin slid down the trash wall of Zado City and walked into the middle of the group of beasts. If someone were to see this, he or she would say that it was a suicidal action, but Zin walked over without any hesitation. They're starving. Beasts were animals and some of the beasts noticed Zin, but they ignored him. There was meat already in front them, and corpse-eating beasts preferred to eat corpses, instead of attacking living humans for meat. Kya. Grr. Furthermore, if the corpse-eating beasts were hungry to the point that they'd attack each other, they wouldn't pay attention to Zin at all. So it was more dangerous to attack these beasts first. Although Zin walked freely among the beasts, the beasts paid no attention to him and continued to feast on the corpse. A hunter was able to survive in the wilderness not because he was strong, but because he was knowledgeable about beasts. He would know how to handle the different beasts. While others would have run away scared or started swinging their weapons, Zin calmly walked between the flesh-gnawing beasts. In the midst of a bone-breaking and flesh-chewing sounds, he walked. And the hunter thought to himself, Zado city was destroyed about a month ago. If the beasts attacked then, the corpses should be nothing but bare bones by now. So it's strange that the beasts are still eating now. Corpse hunters have just arrived. Why would they leave the corpses untouched for a month? Was the beast that attacked the city so dangerous that the corpse-eating beasts were too scared to come any closer? In the ancient Korean region, there are no beasts that hunt for the purpose of getting anything other than meat. Then why would the beast leave behind all the meat? If it planned to destroy the city, it would have nested in the city and consumed all the corpses. The hunter started analyzing. The corpse hunters did not destroy the city. The beast's purpose in attacking Zado city wasn't for corpses' meat. In the ancient Korea region, all beasts attack for the purpose of getting meat. There is a possibility that a wanderer-type beast might have entered the region. But it's very unlikely. It will be hard to come up with a conclusion regarding this incident. I'll need to look around for more clues. The corpse hunters weren't a threat. These beasts were cowards by nature and didn't act as a group. Each beast lived for their own benefit, so after eating they would run away from the different beasts. Just as beasts were not a human's only threat, humans were not the beast's only threat. In Zado city, the residential area was mostly made up of shacks and regular buildings. The hunter slowly refined the identity of the culprit. Sin did not go inside the building since there'd be more corpse hunters inside them. Most of the shacks that had been hastily built with slates had collapsed, but the concrete buildings were still intact. It was a beast that can crush shacks, but not concrete ones. It's possible that it's not an extra large or large-sized one, but a mid-sized beast. Mid-sized beasts couldn't go inside the buildings. But Zin heard flesh-eating sounds coming from inside the buildings. That meant that smaller-sized beasts had entered the building and killed the humans. Small-sized and mid-sized beasts attacked the city. There were more tall buildings toward the center of the city, with louder sounds of beasts coming from inside the buildings. It was clear that all the humans had been killed. As Zin scouted around the area, he couldn't help but think about the unexplainable things. Claw marks. On the hardened mud, there were giant claw marks made up of 4 deep lines. Naturally, Zin remembered Bakgu's words. I think the wolves did it. But a single giant wolf wouldn't be able to destroy a city of this magnitude by itself. And it made no sense that a solitary beast would attack the city with a group of small-sized beasts. The situation seemed suspicious and improbable. No way. As Zin reached the center of the Zado ruins, he couldn't believe his eyes. Even he cool-tempered Zin frowned at the bizarre scene in front of him. Crunch. Crunk. KRRR. Gaurail. There were at least 50 corpse hunters eating corpses. It was a dreadful scene where ghouls, corpse-eating beasts, and poisonous dogs all mingled together. However, Zin wasn't frowning because of that. Bakgu, you were right. The giant pieces of flesh that the corpse hunters were hurriedly munching on were actually the dead bodies of 5 giant wolves. As Bakgu had said, Zado city had been destroyed by an attack of mid-sized beasts, giant wolves. But those giant wolves were now all dead. Zin climbed up the ladder on a tilted building and watched the scene from the roof of the tall building. The giant wolves had attacked a city. Among the beasts that attacked, the mid-sized beasts were the giant wolves. And the smaller-sized ones were the cubs. There were the dead bodies of the cubs as well, but the corpse hunters were feasting on them. It was an unbelievable sight. Giant wolves acted on their own since they only attacked beasts and humans that trespassed. They only went out to hunt if they were starving. It was almost impossible for all 10 giant wolves to be starving at the same time. After finishing the hunt, did the wolves fight against the others and then kill each other? The fact that the corpses are in one place suggests that they were fighting against each other, resulting in their deaths. If that was the case, it explained why the corpse hunters would have arrived later. Because the smell of blood from the giant wolves was all over the place, so the corpse hunters wouldn't have dared to approach the city. It was an unexplainable situation for an ordinary person. In any case, Zin's purpose was to find out who attacked the city, not to take revenge on the attackers. Therefore, after looking at the pile of corpses, Zin's mission was complete. The beasts were the giant wolves, and they were all dead after the attack. So, the people of Ardpoint would not need to migrate. Would this make sense for the elder? Zin knew that his explanation wouldn't be enough to be accepted by the elder. It was not an ordinary situation, and it was very possible that the elder would take it as a false report. Without a recording device, it would be a challenge to convince him with the truth. Zin could yank out a couple of teeth from the giant wolves as evidence. But he would not be able to receive additional compensation. A hunter's main goal was not to find the truth. Mysteries were best left as mysteries, and hunters only needed to accomplish the request. The world was full of unexplainable events anyway, and there was no reason to risk one's life to understand them. Zin looking at the corpse hunters whose stomachs were bulging out from feasting on the meat. This feels like a devil's deed indeed. However, Zin has witnessed many incidents that seemed to be done by a devil, but many of them did not turn out to be the case. This sort of bizarre events, though not too often, could happen at any given time. Whatever reason the giant wolves had gathered in this place, it could not have been a devil that did it. For Zin, Tahir, were more important matters than observing the collapse of a city. Since the city's chip safes were now without owners, it now waited for a new owner. With the amount of chips that a city of this size would own, Zin would be able to extend his uptime. Zin's alternative goal for this surveillance request was to reclaim the chips within the city. It was more important to profit off what was certain, rather than focusing on the unknown. That was a surefire law of survival. Fortunately, the Reavers won't be able to come in because of the beasts. Many thieves could come to the city as soon as news of its collapse started to spread around. However, Reavers could not approach the city because of the many corpse hunters. In a sense, beasts become an excellent line of defense. Hunters only hunted when there was a need for it, and they utilized beasts for that purpose as well. Zin started searching buildings that would have safes in them. Over there, Zin started moving towards a relatively intact building in the southeast side of the city. Crook. And behind the remains of a corpse, something was starting to wiggle and shake ominously. Usually, cities had big chip safes due to the threat of thieves. Storing chips at home was considered stupid. Merchants formed unions and stored all the chips in one safe altogether. Occasionally, there were times when the guards would embezzle the chips, but storing chips inside the safe was considered quite secure. When someone had one's chips taken away by the robbers, it was very likely that one's life could also be at risk. As a result, the people established a bizarre rationale for using a safe. Safes were supposed to be placed in secure locations, and secure locations were usually ordinary locations. People had similar thoughts, and so safes were usually placed in predictable locations. Zin entered a rather well-maintained 4-story building. Safes were usually in the basement of a safe building. Zin could not remember a time when this rule did not apply. Perhaps humans instinctively thought that it was more secure to be underground. Zin felt thankful for the tendencies of people. As Zin walked down, he stopped at the sound coming from ahead. Crunch, crunk. A ghoul was sitting down and gnawing on something. As expected, there were corpses here, 3 to be exact. I guess they were killed while trying to rob the safe. The stairway was the only way down to the basement. Blocking the stairway, the ghoul kept eating the corpse and ignored Zin. In the midst of this tragedy, these people had died from their greed in robbing the safe. It probably wouldn't be smart to get too close to the ghoul. The ghoul would react if one were to pass by. Fortunately, there was only one ghoul, so taking care of it was not a big deal for Zin. Zin took out a gauntlet with blades. The blade gauntlet was especially useful in dealing with small-sized monsters. Slowly and quietly, Zin approached the ghoul that had its back against him. Crunch, crunch, krrr, krrr. The ghoul wasn't aware of Zin at all as it continued to focus on its meal. Zin moved slowly, almost as if he stood still. Like a person walking for the first time, Zin very quietly drew close enough to the ghoul that he could see the soiled paws on its head. Hunting was simple. Approach quietly. And then crack. When hunting, move swifter than sound. Kr ag, crack. Pow, kra, k. Zin grabbed the ghoul by the neck, breaking it and yanking it completely off the body. The blades on gauntlet slashed the ghoul's neck apart. Zin overpowered the body of the ghoul and pinned it down until it stopped moving. Hunting was different from fighting a battle. Hunting involved the battle and the time taken to approach the enemy, or the time it took for the enemy to approach the hunter. Overpowering the enemy within a split second was the most optimal method of hunting. The battle itself was important yet took the shortest time. Zin stuck the blue chip extractor into the ghoul's corpse. It extracted a total of 3 chips from the body. Zin pulled out the extractor and headed down towards the safe. He found a closed old steel door, but the locks were unfastened. The steel door was so heavy that it would require at least 3 ordinary people to open. That was probably the reason why there were 3 dead people in here. They tried to open the steel door. And on the steel door, there were dozens of claw marks streaked across the surface. For Zin, it wasn't so hard to open the steel door. Kriak. The heavy steel door scratched the floor as it swung open. Zin felt stunned at the sight of the lantern light. Zin shook his head as he looked at what lay in front of him. A person woke to the sound of the opening steel door and looked sluggishly at Zin. The person smiled faintly. It's a human. A girl was lying down on the floor. The girl was so malnourished it seemed like a miracle that she was still alive. She slowly murmured, water, please, say. The girl passed out after saying the words. Zin looked at the girl on the floor. Her body had been tied up with ropes. Zin looked around slowly to determine if she posed a threat. The exhausted girl did not wake up as Zin examined her like an object. The hunter thought, looking at the color of her eyes, she's not a vagabond, and since she's a child, she can't be a Reaver. A civilian. She looks extremely starved. It's a miracle she's still alive. This door is too heavy for the giant wolf cubs to push open, and I wonder if that's how she survived. The wolves tried to open the door after sniffing the girl's scent, but the door wouldn't open. That's probably the reason for the claw marks on the door. On the other hand, the door was too heavy for the girl to open. The safe saved her, but at the same time, she was starving to death inside the safe. I wonder how she entered the safe in the first place. Did the dead robbers trap her inside? The hunter analyzed. I can use her as a witness. This girl was a survivor of Zado City. She could be used as a witness for the Ard Point request. Or he could leave her alone after listening to her testimony. It would be cumbersome to bring this small child all the way back to Ard Point. Zin searched the safe, leaving the girl alone. Soon, Zin found another reason to keep the girl alive. No chips here. There was not a single chip inside the safe. When the girl woke up, the first thing she saw was a man boiling something in a pot. Inside the sealed safe, the man watched the girl. You finally woke up. Zin passed a cup of water to the girl, and the girl barely grabbed the cup to drink the water. The girl felt more energized, as if her thirst had disappeared with the crispness of the water. Who are you? A hunter. I see. I thought I was gonna die. Thank you. No need for that. Zin passed a bowl of soup to the girl, and she ate it quickly. Burning her tongue as she drank the hot soup, she finished it completely. I gave you water and food, so now answer my questions. The girl understood what he was about to ask. Zin was not a polite person, and spoke harshly. I've got 3 questions for you. Quote ellipsis quote. First, what caused the destruction of Zado City? Second, how did you end up inside the safe? Third, where are all the chips in the safe? Zin asked the 3 questions quickly, while the girl stayed still and alert, looking at Zin. In the wilderness, safety was not guaranteed. If the hunter didn't get the answer he wanted, there was no knowing how he would react. What happens if I don't answer? I will make you answer them. How? Well, are you curious? As Zin spoke, the girl's face hardened. The girl talked slowly and with great animosity. You're going to kill me after I answer, aren't you? The girl's suspicions were understandable, yes. Ins people frequently killed others after gaining the needed information. If I'm someone who'd kill you after listening to your answers, don't you think I'd kill you if you don't answer? Speak. Then, I am going to ask you one thing too. The girl spoke brazenly, seemingly unaware of her situation. The world was full of countless crazy and weird fools, and this behavior was nothing new to Zin. He asked, what is it? The girl showed him her empty soup bowl. This, I chewed on something meat-like. She'd eaten it in a hurry, and the food had the texture of meat. It was very tough and smelled bad. She'd eaten it first, but felt uneasy afterwards. More importantly, meat was not something that people shared with strangers so easily. Of course it tasted like meat because it is meat. What meat? The hunter started eating the soup and pointed at the steel door. I just hunted a ghoul. Huh, what? You don't get it, do you? So you're saying that this meat is. What else? Ghoul meat. Oop, blarg. The girl started throwing up as soon as she heard the words. Zin sighed as he watched the girl throw up. Kids these days. Spitting out words like an old fart. Zin continued to eat the ghoul meat soup. The girl seemed hungry again after throwing up and started eating the soup, stuffing it down her throat. She felt nauseated, but she continued to eat since she felt that she'd surely die if she didn't eat anything. Phew. The girl looked better after eating, and she glanced at Zin. I'm Leona. What's your name? I didn't ask for your name. Answer my questions. Leona pouted. If you forgot the questions, let me repeat them. First, I remember them all. You don't need to tell me again. Cutting him off, Leona became more attentive. What guarantee do I have that you'll spare my life if I answer all your questions? Well, I am planning to take you to Ard Point, which is 4 days away out west, to use you as a witness for a request. Without you, I won't get paid 100 blue chips, so killing you is not in my interests. That's hard to understand. Can you explain? Leona made a face as though she couldn't understand Zin's words. And Zin lamented that kids these days weren't quick to pick up on things. You're a survivor, so you should know the full details about the city's demise. What does demise mean? Zin felt helpless thinking about how he'd need to explain his words in layman's terms. After a short pause, Zin started speaking once more to the puzzled Leona. I need you because you know better than I do how this place ended up as a dump. Without you, I cannot solve my homework, understand? Ah, okay. That's better. Zin sighed again at seeing Leona understand his easier words. So you're telling me that you need to tell someone why Zado got trashed, and because I know it the best, you need to take me to the boss, and that's the reason you can't kill me. As dumb as you are, you're starting to get it. Hey, what do you mean? Just joking. Joking. Leona shook her head, but didn't ask again. She started answering the first question. I don't know exactly when I started hearing the wolves howling all over the place, and then big and small wolves starting killing people. Weren't you trapped in the safe? When the monsters came, the wolf cubbies trapped me inside the safe so that I couldn't run away. Those giant wolves don't form packs. Those monsters. Do you know why they were forming packs? Leona shrugged. I don't know. They were just doing it. There was no way she would know. As Leona answered the first question, she answered the second question as well. Suddenly, the attack began and she was trapped in the safe. It was not by her will. Did you cause some issues in the city? I killed 2 people. Why? One tried to steal my chips, and the other tried to rape me. I see. Sin was surprised by the fact that this small girl was able to kill people, let alone that she killed without any remorse. Leona had committed 2 murders in Zado. One of the victims was a robber, the other a rapist. However, Leona shrugged it off as if weren't a big deal. I wasn't imprisoned because of that. Then why were you? The guard captain took all my chips away as a fine. Who fines someone in a city? It's just ridiculous. Leona spoke to herself, gnashing her teeth in anger. And shortly after, she smirked. And that's why I looted this safe. Unfortunately, I got busted. Getting the full picture of what happened, Zin nodded his head. Leona tried looting the safe and got caught. She had bruises all over her body, and had probably been beaten by the guards. They tied me up and asked me where I hid the chips, but am I crazy? Why would I tell them about it? They were sure to kill me after I told them. So, I just shut my mouth and kept quiet. See that over there? I was tied and hanged in that thing. I thought I was gonna die. Leona pointed at a steel pole, saying that they tied her to it and left her to hang in the air. The guard captain locked me up in the safe when the beasts started to attack. That's all that I know. If Leona were to die, there was no way for the guard captain to figure out where the chips went, so he probably locked her in the safe to keep her alive. The guard probably hadn't thought that the monsters would annihilate the city. So the dead people outside weren't trying to steal from the safe, but trying to escape into the safe. After the city got attacked, there was a possibility that they were killed while trying to take refuge inside the safe. But that didn't matter much. Goners were goners. Sin still had his doubts as he asked, if you can steal from the safe, then that means you can open the safe, so why were you trapped in it? Couldn't you have escaped? Are you an amateur? Leona shook her head as if Zin was speaking nonsense. If a professional were asked to reveal her skill set, would she do it? As Leona spoke with a serious facial expression, Zin laughed. A pro, haha. That's right. Sorry for asking. You watch your tongue. I'll do that. Well, actually, it's not even that big of a secret, anyway. Leona whispered as if she were about to reveal a big secret. The guard captain dude created a tunnel leading from his house to the safe, so I just stole his home key. After I stole from the safe, he blocked off the tunnel afterward. Aha, gotcha. I threatened to reveal his secret tunnel if he killed me. After hearing that, he didn't kill me. But I almost died from hunger. As a thief, Leona was as crafty as a cat. She hadn't revealed the captain's big secret, yet clung to stay alive, since dying would mean losing everything. Well, maybe crafty is not the right description. She has survival instincts. Rather than thinking through her choices, she acted based on her instincts to survive. There was nothing more important than one's instincts in order to survive in the wilderness. Sin concluded that Leona wasn't originally from Zado, but had arrived at Zado as a vagabond. It was nearly impossible for a kid like this to wander and survive around the wilderness with just instincts and determination alone. Although he had yet to resolve the mystery around the giant wolf pack, Zin thought that listening to Leona's story was good enough. Then, Zin brought up the most important thing. Now, let's talk about the chips that you've hidden. Leona's face hardened. Those are mine. They're stolen chips. Or stolen goods. Whether stolen or not, once they're in my hands, they're mine. Well, I'll just steal them from you. Then they'll be mine. No. Picking up unclaimed goods is not stealing. Picking up something secretly, mugging someone, stealing is stealing. There's no difference. Leona had no way to win the argument over Zin, since no one could justify the act of stealing. Are you a Reaver? If circumstances call for it, I could be. Zin smiled as Leona started slowly backing away with caution. Consider yourself lucky that I don't like taking such measures. If seizing things through force was the main part of the job, then there'd be no reason to become a hunter. Hunters lived by a code of rules, and although not perfect, Zin tried to live according to that code. Unless it was a reasonable request, a hunter did not kill people to gain chips. In the wilderness, one might kill someone for survival, but hunters and reavers were different by nature. Hunters did not live only to steal. How many chips did you take? Around 2,000. That's quite a bit. That amount of chips would prolong at least 2,000 hours of life. This place is surrounded by corpse hunters. Not sure if you're aware, but they don't mindlessly attack humans. But, in your case, it's different. Hunters usually took on requests, but at times, they gave requests as well. Just like prey will target the weaklings, the beasts will target the weak. And you are definitely susceptible to an attack. Quote ellipsis quote. It was evident that Leona would be attacked by the corpse hunters if she were to walk out. I will take you safely to Ardpoint. However, I will take half of your chips. You said that you need me anyway, which is why you're taking me, right? And you're trying to take chips as well. Now you're an amateur. Zin laughed as he shrugged. Pros do not work for free. Leona stood with a hollow look as Zin threw her words back at her. Request fees always fluctuated, and it depended on the urgency of the request. Even if the work had to be carried out, no request was free. Hunters were beings that were more stingy than the Reavers. Now aren't you a con artist? Leona was staring at Zin as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. If I were in your shoes, I'd rather deal with a con artist than a robber. Damn, Zin was logical in his reasoning, making him a very malicious person who exploited others with his way of thinking. Leona pondered as she looked at the cold-hearted hunter. If this hunter had bad intentions, he could just kill her and take away all the chips. He could easily decide not to keep his word. The hunter could attack Leona at any time if he found the place where the chips were hidden. Leona was caught in a dilemma and she didn't know what to do. I know what your dilemma is. Thud. Zin tossed a palm-sized metallic box to Leona. Keep in mind that a hunter considers a request as doubts as well. What is this? It's called a chip box. Chip box. Hunters use this to store chips. It will not open without entering a set password. If possibly opened, it'll explode. Password. You can set the password, and if the box is not opened with the password, the box explodes. Zin explained to Leona how to set a password into the chip box, how to open it, and how to store the chips. It wasn't a typical item seen around the ancient Korea region, but most of the hunters in the broader continent carried them around. A chip box worked as a purse as well as a defense mechanism from the Reavers. A chip box became a more powerful bomb the more chips stored inside it. Therefore, the Reavers avoided the hunters. If they were to attack the hunters and the chip box exploded, they would lose the chips as well as kill themselves in the process. And the item was also used to instill confidence to requesters on bodyguard requests. You can store your chips here and pay me when we arrive at Ardpoint. Then there'd be no concern on your end. But what if this doesn't explode? What if you know how to open this forcibly? Good questions, but I've been using this chip box all this time myself. If this can be opened forcibly or doesn't explode, that spells trouble for me. There is a way to open it forcibly, but it needs to be taken to the chip box manufacturing plant. Where's that plant? It's about a half-year's walking distance. Oh, Leona seemed more amazed at hearing of a place that far rather than the fact that it was really far. She was surprised that such places existed. Leona examined the chip box here and there, touching it all over. The chip box was empty with no chips, but the box looked as if it could explode at any time. I feel cheated, but what can I do? You can't change your heart in the middle of the request, so I'll accept your deal. You'd better protect me well. You came to a decision pretty quick after some thought. Are you sure? If I want to survive, I gotta take my chances. Remember that. Leona put her hands around her waist and talked back to Zin, who laughed. Here was a kid giving survival tips to a hunter. Of course, Leona was right. At times, one needed to pick one of the poisons and just hoped for the best. At least Leona had the guts to make a decision. Zin had lived for a long time, but he was amused to see such a bold girl. Leona laughed. And I am pretty lucky when I gamble. It was a more sinister laugh than a bright one. Leona appeared quite energetic for a girl who had starved for a long time. Mister, can I tell you something? What is it? Leona stood a. Andy started searching the dark corner of the safe. Those who get things stolen look for their things all over the world except one place. Heave, creak. Leona moved one cabinet that was used as a safe with all her strength. Behind the safe, there was soil between the collapsed walls. Leona crawled between the cracks of the wall and swept something up. Shortly after, covered in dust, Leona crawled out of the cracks with a smile. And that place is where the goods got stolen. Zado's stolen chips were still in the same safe. But they were in a different location within the safe. Zin had to acknowledge that the kid was no ordinary kid. She didn't take the chips outside little by little, but instead created a hole, hid them, and planned to get a large sack to steal them at dusk. Zin couldn't help but laugh at her impressive intelligence. From Zin's point of view, this kid was indeed clever. Let's go. You know that you need to protect me, right? Nope. You forgot something. What's that? Prepayment. Half of the payment you owe me. Leona took out chips from the chip box, grumbling as if she'd taken a bite of raw ghoul meat. The kid was a clever pro, but Zin was a seasoned pro. As soon as they opened the safe door, Zin heard the earth shake with a loud boom. Leona's face stiffened, and Zin stood still, frozen. Kag, karg, krak, krihik, krrrrrr, kruk, wah. What the? Shush, be quiet. Zin lifted Leona onto his shoulder as he looked at the shaky ceiling. Leona realized that it was not the time to resist, and she let Zin carry her. Zin moved slowly up the stairs, minimizing the sound of his footsteps and breaths. The hunter thought, boom, boom, walking sound, 2 feet. Large-sized, growl, howling sound, living animal. Crack, no, slurp slurp, krrrhk. Beast eating. Zin organized his thoughts as he walked up the stairs. The building was in danger of collapsing, and Zin needed to evacuate from the basement as soon as possible, but he didn't hurry. Without seeing them, Zin figured out what sort of beasts were out there based on their sounds. Large-sized beasts that walk on 2 feet, hunting corpse hunters. Instead of heading outside, Zin continued to climb up the stairs to the rooftop. The sun had set, and it was dark all around. Turning on a lamp would be suicidal. The beasts were shrieking while they ran away from the new predator, and some were screaming while getting eaten. And then, another scream rang out. Krafua. Quite a different sound than before. If it's got at least 2 vocal cords, it must be a mutated beast. Mutated beasts were made up of a mix of different beings and did not have ordinary body organs, but strange-shaped ones instead. There were corpses and the signs of death everywhere, and a beast was eating corpse hunters. The hunter thought, man-eater. It was a beast which was infuriated by the thought of the corpse hunters defiling their bodies upon death. It hunted down corpse hunters, and with each kill grew bigger in size. It was an amalgam of hatred formed from malice and resentment. The man-eater was a beast that hunted down other beasts. There were different methods to attack and overpower different beasts. As soon as Zin realized it was a man-eater, he rushed to the rooftop of the building. about 150 feet away. Zin saw a 20 feet tall beast annihilating its surroundings. Leona was able to see the scene as well. Wow, what the hell is that? Leona grew petrified as she looked at the horrendous monster. The monster appeared to be a mix of many slabs of flesh joined together, with many hair-like tentacles waving freely. And the tentacles were grabbing any corpse hunters it could find, eagerly stuffing them into one of its 3 mouths. The monster walked with 2 feet, using its hair tentacles as twisted ropes while it ate up the corpse hunters. No. Crack. The horrifying sounds continued and all that remained of the beasts were pools of blood. The appearance of the monster was more than enough to cause a person to faint from horror. Leona had never seen such a monster and did not expect to encounter one so massive. However, Leona didn't look fazed. It looks like an ugly piece of crap. Leona's words were those of disgust, not of horror. Just as Leona spoke in that manner, Zin suddenly said, "As you said, today's our lucky day. Lucky day. With that thing rampaging in front of us." She wasn't horrified per se, but she knew that the situation was dire. She was puzzled at Zin's words. Zin smiled. "That thing will chase away all the corpse hunters." What? As mentioned, hunters managed to survive because they were quite knowledgeable. That monster doesn't prioritize humans as targets. It will start attacking us after getting rid of all the corpse hunters. They were safe for the time being. That is, for the time being. The world was a wild ecosystem. And the humans were not at the top of the food chain. Therefore, beasts fought against each other and ate one another. For the beasts, humans were just a type of prey. They didn't eat humans and some didn't even bother with humans. Growl. Zin and Leona watched the man-eater as it lay waste eating the corpse hunters around the ruins of Zado City. Ghouls, beasts, and poisonous dogs all got sucked into the man-eater's mouth. So, you're telling me that we're safe for now, but we won't be in a bit? Yes. Then I think we should be running for our lives right now, Leona argued. But Zin shook his head. What do you think will happen after that thing eats a lot of beasts? It'll get full. Zin almost laughed out loud at her simplistic and straightforward answer. But he held in his laughter as he didn't want to make a sound in front of the monster. Although Zin didn't laugh, he looked pretty amused. Leona couldn't possibly laugh while looking at the ugly-looking monster. Does that monster look cute to you? Why are you freaking smiling? Zin had no words for Leona's attitude, but he let her be herself. Certainly, Zin was looking cheerfully at the man-eater. I'm glad because it's doing all the hunting for me instead. What are you talking about? A monster that eats a lot of monsters will throw up all the chips it devoured. Leona understood what he meant. And she felt astonished. You're going to hunt that thing right now. While letting the man-eater hunt others, Zin planned to take advantage of the man-eater and hunt it down. Leona thought that running away from the monster was more important than trying to hunt it down. But, Zin looked at Leona, as if he didn't understand why Leona was agitated. What's so weird about a hunter hunting? In truth, there was nothing strange about it. A hunter lived to hunt, and not, for example, to sell merchandise. Leona nodded at Zin's logical-sounding words. Not at all. And she added, but you're freaking weird. Leona thought that hunting the monster was a crazy thing to do, even for a hunter. The man-eater walking around Zado was not very nimble, but its tentacles were swift. The tentacles stretched out and snatched up the beasts, shoving them into the man-eater's mouth. Krrrrrrrrrr. Krrk. Leona said nervously. By the way, isn't that monster getting bigger and bigger? You're correct. Overall, it gained some body mass. Can I run away by myself? Then your prepayment of 500 chips will be mine. Not a loss for me because it's more chips than the reward for my original request. If you want to leave, go ahead. Hey, shouldn't you be following my orders? It was a bodyguard request, not a slavery contract, so I don't have an obligation to follow your orders. Whatever you're babbling, I take it you're just going to do whatever you feel like. You get it. Damn, Leona felt angry, but she had no choice but to stay close to Zin. Although she was a gutsy kid, it was impossible for a kid to navigate through a field of monsters. Avoiding danger only to encounter bigger danger was foolish. Even though Leona was not sure what was more dangerous, she felt drawn towards the somewhat reckless hunter's confidence. Leona was no different than Zin by the fact that she was a vagabond wandering around the wilderness. And the thing that kept her from getting killed was not her boldness. It was her intuition and her decisiveness to act that kept her alive. And this time around, her instincts were telling her to stick with the weird hunter. The man-eater was too busy eating, so it didn't bother with Zin or Leona. Now's the time. Zin took out a finger-sized lantern from his coat. It was such a small lantern that it looked like a small container. There were dark spots inside the crystal lantern. Blood stains. Leona shook her head as she looked at the object. She wasn't sure what it was, exactly. But, she grew surprised when she saw a small miracle happening because of it. Woo-woo-woo, the lantern started resonating with sound as darkness spilled out of it. The darkness surrounded the lantern, with a radius of about the size of a basketball. But it wasn't quite darkness, to be precise. It looked like a small sphere, as if one had plucked out a ball from the dark sky. As if conjuring a small galaxy, the black sphere contained a night sky scattered with stars and planets. Zin boldly stuck his hand inside the sphere and took something out. Leona was left speechless as she saw this supernatural event unfold in front of her. Whoosh! With a strange sound, Zin took out a huge gun and some ammunition from the small sphere. Wow, what is this? I used a charm to utilize the void. What do you mean? Thin. Key of it is a bag that you don't need to carry around. Although this thing doesn't have enough space. Zin checked the ammo for the sniper rifle as well as the equipment's condition as he looked through its scope. Kadank. It's got enough space to house a couple of guns. As Zin turned off the lantern, the void disappeared. People called it void storage, and the small charm was made up of aliens' blood. The devil hunters used these charms to conjure the power of the sacrificial blood. The blood couldn't invoke the horrifying and devilish power of the monsters, but it was small enough to be used in many useful ways. The power of the charm wasn't strong enough to kill others, but Zin used the charm to store bulky or heavy items inside the void. In truth, the most troublesome matter for wanderers was carrying stuff around rather than fighting off monsters. The void storage acted as portable storage and was something that Zin often utilized even though it wasn't a powerful charm. Zin referred to the void storage as a bag instead. Leona was astonished at what she'd just witnessed. But her next comment was very practical. That's so handy. Leona became interested in the bag when she remembered all the things she'd had to throw away because she couldn't carry them along. And above all, it was her first time seeing a rifle, so she wasn't sure what Zin would use the metal object for. Grovel. As the man-eater continued to eat, Zin quickly finished inspecting his rifle. When hunting, being efficient was more important than winning. Spending 30 chips to hunt down a monster that yielded 10 chips was an inefficient hunt. Maximizing the reward with the least cost was important. So, Zin didn't take out the largest caliber firearm. Zin took out a .308 Winchester, a custom Remington 700 model that used 7.62 mm ammo. The sniper rifle was not new, but it was in clean and excellent condition from regular maintenance and part replacements. Regardless of the rifle's power and efficiency, a rifle was useless against a monster of such size. However, Zin loaded 2 rounds of ammo into the rifle. The monster was about 300 yards away, and Zin didn't need to use the scope. Sniping required skills, but the monster was so huge that even an aimless shot would hit it. However, Zin looked carefully through the scope. And he took a shot at one of the monster's mouths. Bang! What was that? Leona shouted as she saw the gun barrel explode with a bang for the first time. But a more surprising thing happened afterward. Crack! The bullet hit the man-eater, and one of its mouths exploded into pieces. It was unbelievable that a single bullet could be so destructive. It seemed as if a bazooka had hit the mouth instead. The 7.62 mm bullet's jacket was full of blue chip powder, which exploded as soon as it hit the target. It was a regular bullet, but it had exploded like a shotgun shell as soon as it hit the target. A micro-tank gunnery, or a missile. That was the bullet that Zin had used. As soon as it hit the man-eater, the beast was left shell-shocked. It started to swing its tentacles wildly, but it was unable to identify its attacker. Zin did not stop there and cocked the rifle again. Shortly after, he fired another shot. Bang! Aha! Leona lay flat on the ground, covering her ears from the loud sound and the flash of the gunshot. Crash! This time around, the bullet did not explode, but it struck the shredded mouth, flaring it up. Within seconds, one of the man-eater's mouths started to burn up from flames, covering it with white smoke. Krag. Because of the flames, the man-eater was swinging its tentacles in pain, destroying all the buildings around it. Zin loaded 3 more rounds. All of them were of 2 different types, a 7.62 mm buckshot that exploded upon contact, and the just-fired number 76 firebomb that had engulfed the man-eater's mouth in flames. Blue chips were infused into Regu La firebomb ammo to manufacture this particular firebomb. On a 7.62 mm jacket, this special ammunition delivered great destructive power and flames even with just a small amount of powder. Leona looked in awe at the burning man-eater which was brightly lighting up the night sky. What the heck was that? It's over. Zin watched the man-eater rampaging in pain. He'd overpowered the man-eater with 2 bullets. How in the world is this possible? A beast's blood is highly inflammable. Past or present, fire was the enemy of beasts. Leona wasn't sure what Zin meant. He continued to stand still. Hey, mister, by the way. Leona felt uneasy as she looked at the struggling man-eater. Hey, I think the man-eater just spotted us. Am I seeing things? Leona couldn't help but feel that the man-eater was looking at them. Zin nodded. I think you're right. Really? Then Zin yanked Leona away and started running with her on his shoulders. We're out of here. Growl. Thud. Thud thud thud. The enraged man-eater started charging towards Zin and Leona with great speed, and it was terrifying. Zin ran without looking back, but Leona, who was hanging onto Zin's shoulders, looked straight at the man-eater as it charged towards them, destroying the buildings in its way. Faster! Run faster! It was a terrifying scene for Leona as the beast covered in flames was charging toward her. Mister, I think the man-eater is saying that it's going to kill us. Right. Probably. Zin jumped onto the other building's rooftop, running further away from the man-eater. It was not a great sight to see. Since all the corpse hunters had run away, the only ones left in Zado City were Leona, Zin and the flaming man-eater. The man-eater had grown about 20 feet in size, and Zin could barely outrun such a beast. Retreating was probably the best option in this case. Zin was running as fast as he could. Thud. Thud. Zin ran in between buildings where the man-eater couldn't get into. He ran to spots where the man-eater had to destroy to get past. Bam! Wham! The man-eater was mowing down the buildings that Zin passed through, slowing it down in the process. When the man-eater managed to get through one building, Zin would again run away into another building. Why hasn't that thing died already? Probably because of its size. It'll take a while for it to burn to death. It was clear that the flame-covered man-eater was slowly dying. But it didn't look weak yet, and it was setting the city of Zado on fire as parts of its inflamed body dropped to the ground. Bam! The man-eater's body parts exploded into flames as they fell off. 1 hour. That was the time it took for the flames to subdue the gigantic man-eater. Thud. Breathing hard from running away from the man-eater, Zin and Leona stared at the man-eater's corpse as it lay dead on the ground, no longer twitching. The two sat down on a tile of concrete, waiting for the man-eater to cool down enough for Zin to extract the chips. Leona wasn't so impressed by Zin, even though he'd taken down the man-eater with 2 shots. Leona started grumbling. You know, I thought a hunter only needed a few seconds to take a beast down, and it'd be more exciting, too. Leona had some fixed perceptions about hunters, and they weren't too different from other people. People imagined hunters hunting down beasts in a flashy battle, with clashing weapons, using swift and smooth moves. Sin smiled. Only amateurs fight in such a way. A real hunter wasn't flashy. One hunted with minimal effort. And one reaped the maximum profit. And it was more relevant for Zin, whose survival depended on the chips. Leona also nodded. Flashiness had nothing to do with profit. You're not too afraid of beasts, are you? Zin asked Leona. Leona screamed from time to time, but not out of terror. Leona replied as if it were nothing. I won't be afraid, even if I can't fight against them. Terror led to atrophy, and atrophy led to certain death. Being terrified has no benefit. As Leona laughed, Zin acknowledged that the kid was a pretty special one. Your attitude definitely matches your name. Name. What about my name? Leona shook her head. Names were just names, and nobody really cared for the origin or meaning of names. Not afraid, even though one can't fight against them. Zin thought that Leona's words were pretty cool. What about my name? Nah, nothing. Although it no longer exists in this world. Leona, a female lion. A couple of hours later, Zin plugged the extractor into the body of the man-eater, smoke still rising from its flesh, and extracted the chips. It extracted 108 chips from the man-eater, along with the chips from the beasts devoured by the man-eater, coming to a total of 229 chips. Taking into account the cost of the 2 shots, the profit was 168 chips. It was a very efficient hunt. Zin had profited pretty well from his investigation efforts in Zado, considering that he would get the request's reward, the chips from Leona, as well as the chips from the man-eater. 400 H uptime added. Zin had profited, but the fact that he had to consume most of the chips hadn't changed. Leona was astonished to see Zin pour hundreds of chips into his mouth. Zin, you're crazy. Why the heck are you eating all that? It was understandable that Leona would be surprised. People used blue chips as a currency in the age of the apocalypse, and the blue chip was the only source of energy. However, blue chips contained a poison called CP. And it was not for human consumption. Back in the pre-apocalypse days, it would be like drinking petroleum. Zin wiped his mouth, and talked as if nothing had happened. It's okay to eat, so don't worry. Isn't it weird to eat them just because they're okay to eat? 400 chips were enough to sustain the energy consumption of a village for a couple of months. The two lodged at an abandoned building in Zado City. One where all the beasts had fled away from. They were planning to leave the following morning, and Zin's mission would be complete as soon as they returned to Ardpoint for the reward. For unknown reasons, Zin had given up on trying to understand the unexplainable events in the world. Zin started a fire and put the pot on top of it. He took out a slab of meat and glanced at Leona. Is that from the man-eater? Leona shuddered at the thought. Ghoul meat had been terrifying for Leona, and she wondered how horrible the man-eater's meat would taste like. If you'd like to taste the fire-bombed, flame-grilled meat, I can bring you some. Zin did not eat meat charred by poisonous fumes. Aside from the poison, the meat would taste nasty. And ghoul meat wasn't any better. So, you're saying it's not from the man-eater, right? Yeah, it's ghoul meat. That doesn't make me happy at all. Man-eater or ghoul meat, either choice would be bad. But Leona knew that it was about choosing the lesser of two evils. The boiled ghoul meat smelled bad, but Leona readily dug into it since she was already used to its flavor. You adapt pretty well. Probably explains how you survived so far. When Leona first ate the ghoul meat, she had felt nauseated, but now she was laser focused on her meal. Zin started to wonder why she was wandering around in this terrible world. But he stayed silent. Leona started to speak again. Mister, what's your name? Zin. Single syllable name. Pretty unique. There are unusual names just as there's a name for each person. Leona sat by the fireplace, absent-mindedly watching the fire burn. Zin was an old man who didn't sleep much, and Leona wasn't a good kid who'd go to bed early. You had many opportunities to visit different places, right? You could say that. Leona looked at Zin and asked, is there any good place you could call home? A place like home. A city where a little kid like me can live. Point, castle, anywhere. Zin pondered for a bit. What's the criteria for one to call a place their home? From Zin's perspective, there was no such place in this world. However, he did think of a relatively, or somewhat of an okay place. As soon as you're done with your request, I'd like to live in such a place. Isn't a city where you can live by stealing considered a good place for you? After getting beat up so many times, I'd rather make my living with a job. I don't want to go back to my old ways. Leona shook her head. Zin slowly glanced over her and said, a castle would be good. A castle. If you're entered into the Lord's harem, you'd have no trouble living. Harem. Would they take in a kid like myself? Leona had no reluctance about becoming a member of a harem. Rather, she wondered if they'd accept her in the first place. In a world where integrity no longer existed, survival was more important. Well, it's not too surprising that those kinds of caste lords exist when there are thugs who've tried to rape me. Leona answered as she giggled. A harem would be better off than a prostitute, right? A little kid wouldn't have much power in this world. Being powerless meant that one was a weak being, and the weak were always in danger. They weren't able to work and they were not entrusted to work by others. Regardless if you were male or female. Little kids without guardians would end up exposed to prostitution. Obviously, some kids with guardians could still become prostitutes. They would prostitute themselves either because their parents forced them to, they were abducted, or they needed chips. Leona didn't express any signs of dignity or sadness in her. And neither did she show agony or sorrow. It became a natural thing in this world. Zin felt this difference between the old days and the present. Why are you looking for a place? I ran away from home. And why? I killed my own father. Murderers weren't tolerated in that village, so I took off. Leona left her hometown as a murderer. And she'd wandered around for a new home. As Zin looked at Leona, she murmured, Mum was a prostitute and Dad was a pimp. Leona described her short life in pretty simple words. Customers beat my mum to death, and my dad selected me as his new prostitute. So, I stabbed him and ran away. Explaining her life in two simple sentences, Leona didn't seem to hold a grudge or bear hatred towards the memory. However, it was a bit odd to Zin that Leona, who wasn't reluctant to become a prostitute, would kill her father who'd tried to make her a prostitute. Leona seemed to realize what Zin was thinking and then shrugged her shoulders. Isn't it strange for someone to take my money when I'll be the one working my ass off? Mum lived that way, but not me. You could have just run away. Why kill him? If he hadn't slapped my face when I told him to split the money 7-3, I wouldn't have killed him. Leona giggled, and Zin laughed, too speechless to respond. If being reckless was a talent, Leona would be a genius in that department. Sin had told Leona to go to the castle, but now he didn't think there was a need for that. The last tea village he left would be the perfect place for Leona. I take back what I said about the castle. You remember that we're going to Ardpoint. Sure, that's a pretty good place. The people at Ardpoint were benevolent. In a world where it was difficult to find any human hospitality, Ardpoint could be a paradise for Leona. It's a safer place where there are fewer beasts, less evil people. And it has more abundant resources compared to other places. That's perfect. Sin kept talking even though it felt unnecessary to explain further. There are no lords since it's a point. And it's been maintaining a community. They'll probably give you the opportunity to do something. Were there kids there? Sin tried to remember his time at Ardpoint, but couldn't remember. Boo. If it was a place where its people could offer 3 potatoes to wanderers, it was probably a good place to live. Sin smiled as Leona looked at him. Ardpoint is not big enough to have a brothel. Where there's a demand, there is a supply, but Ardpoint wasn't a big enough place to run a brothel. Wow, that's good. Leona nodded, interested in Zin's explanation. Shortly after, Zin grew tired of answering all the questions that Leona started to ask non-stop. Well, if you want to get there early, you'd better sleep early. Yeah, I should do that. Leona picked up some pieces of cloth around the fire, lumped them into a pillow and lay down on the floor. Zin watched Leona, who fell asleep shortly after. He slowly closed his eyes as well. Next day, the two started their journey while munching on dried up ghoul meat. The road to their destination was neither too far nor too close, and they walked down the wilderness. The way was pretty quiet, most likely because the beasts were scared of the man-eater. Leona kept on yawning as if she hadn't fully woken up yet. Well, you didn't steal my belongings yesterday. As Zin spoke those words, Leona started giggling beside him. I am a pro, you know, mister. What does being a pro have to do with stealing? A pro only steals what a pro can steal. Do I seem like a hard person to pick off? It felt like you'd get up at any moment. Zin always appeared to be on his guard, even when he slept. At her words, Zin looked at Leona playfully. Well, it sounds like you intended to do something. Quote exclamation mark quote. Leona realized her mistake and grew scared. She had good instincts, but she was still a kid after all. Well, I woke up in the middle of the night, and, you know what I mean, right? Sure. Zin crossed his arms. A sleepless stray cat appeared to be sleeping, but when she tried to steal her master's purse, she realized it wasn't possible. So she just went back to sleep. And now she's yawning like this. Is that your story? No, not true. There's some kind of misunderstanding here, maybe. Zin laughed at Leona, who looked scared to death. In order to survive in this world, a kid trying to steal a hunter's purse was probably just a natural instinct. Since Zin had to take Leona with him anyway, he was willing to let this matter go. You should be thankful for your survival instincts. It's a great asset. Yeah. Leona breathed a sigh of relief. Zin continued to ask, have you stolen like this before? This is the first time I've traveled with a companion. When someone approached me from afar, I always hid. If one couldn't overpower another, it was the right choice to avoid the unknown. Well, you have some pretty good instincts. Mister. Leona cut Zin off, slightly upset as she looked at him. Are you mad at me? Mad at you, I think you are. You're angry, right, you misunderstand me. No. You're not cool about this at all. Do you want to slap my face? Let's get this over with, shall we? As Leona offered her cheek, Zin laughed, speechless. Haha, well, I don't know what to say. You're the one at fault, and now you're telling me that I'm the one with the grudge. See, you are mad, haha. As Leona laughed out loud, Zin looked at the hologram displaying his vital signs. BPM 160. His BPM had doubled. As smart as Leona was, she had a knack for annoying people out of their minds. Zin sighed and looked at Leona. I'm not mad, but I am annoyed. Huh, what? Bam! With a smack on her forehead, Leona started crying out loud. Oh www. Please be quiet and just follow me. That hurt, Mr. Bastard. Zin started walking forward, and Leona followed behind him, cringing. Leona followed and kept pace with Zin as much as she could. A kid and an adult had different physical conditions. Because Zin's physical stamina wasn't ordinary, it was obvious that Leona couldn't keep up with his pace. However, to Zin's surprise, Leona kept on following Zin without much complaint. But Leona was clearly struggling to catch up. Leona wobbled as if she'd fall down, but still bravely kept following Zin. So, Zin paced himself, and Leona was able to follow him without exhausting herself completely. A pretty darn good place to live. Zin and Leona didn't encounter any beasts, even when they were very close to arriving at Ard Point. The beasts in the central region of the Korean peninsula were mostly corpse hunters and poisonous dogs. If the incident at Zado City had decimated the giant wolves, then the surrounding areas would become an even better place to live. On top of that, many corpse hunters would have fled hundreds of miles away because of the appearance of that man-eater. Ard Point had probably become a much better place to live. Hey, mister, is farming hard? I think I can take on farming. Well. As they were approaching Ard Point, Leona grew curious and started asking questions. In farming, people utilize agricultural techniques. But a successful harvest depends on luck. It's hard to learn, and even if you learn, harvesting depends on luck. Can you explain in words I can understand? Leona asked angrily. Zin knew that Leona had a limited vocabulary, but he was annoyed by the fact that he had to explain in layman's terms. Zin started to explain again. Farming is frigging hard. Ah, I see. Leona kept on murmuring. Damned world, nothing's easy. Although it had been a pretty peaceful return trip, Zin wasn't too happy because he needed to hunt some beasts in order to extend his uptime. And when they arrived safely at Ard Point, Zin thought it was too easy of a trip back. Wow, it's tall. Leona stood looking amazed at the wall as if she'd never seen one before. Someone peeked out from the gate. And without a doubt, it was Bakgoo. Bakgoo started waving at them from afar as if he'd been waiting for the hunter to return. Bakgoo started shouting to the people inside the wall. The hunter has returned. Open the gate. Leona was amazed at seeing the steel gate slowly open. Leona started shouting, unable to hold back her emotions. Really want to live here. The thick prison wall looked so safe to Leona that she became emotional. Bakgoo climbed down a ladder from the wall and smiled at them. I was waiting for ya, hunter. Thought you were dead. Bakgoo greeted Zin as if an old-time friend had returned. I wasn't that late, well, you could have died pretty quickly. Look at you, trash talking. Yup, I became good at it. Don't I seem taller, too? Bakgoo pointed at his relatively short height, but Zin shook his head. Not at all. Oh well, anyway, did you get to accomplish your mission? You could say that. Who's this little friend? A survivor of Zado City. She'll provide testimony. It must have been quite a trip, trying to drag a small kid back. You're sure some hunter. Leona was startled when Bakgoo called her a little kid. Little, you're no bigger than I am. Really? Oh, excuse my words, haha. Bakgoo just laughed at Leona's snarky comments without arguing back. Leona was surprised that Bakgoo would respond in such a weird manner. Now, I gotta get going. You know where the elder is at, right? Please go ahead to his building. Sure, thanks. See you later. Bakgoo waved at them and headed back to the wall. The other guards and residents looked at Zin and Leona as they passed by. Everyone thought that the hunter would either get killed or flee. But they were glad to see the hunter return. Leona appeared annoyed. Who the heck was that? Your friend. He just acts like that. I hate those types of people. He seems like a type of person who can't be hated. Leona shook her head at his words. I don't like people who act too friendly when I'm not ready. Well, I don't think you're any better. Bakgu and Leona W. aren't too different in that they were both intrusive, personality-wise. They acted slightly different, but Leona was a little bit more snarky. Mister, you don't get it. Leona laughed. People hate those with similar personalities. As Leona spoke like a 60-year-old granny, Zin laughed out loud. Whether you like it or not, there's no point in acting weird in this place. You're going to live here after all. Ah, that's right. Leona covered her mouth as she smiled. Should I apologize later on? Leona looked like she was in a good mood, wondering what she should do. The elder greeted Zin with the same look as the others, and Zin briefly reported what he'd observed. Leona, who'd come as a witness, talked with the elder as well. It was not smart to believe in a witness's words just because one was a witness. And the elder started asking questions to test Leona. Is the Zado city's guard captain still that big-nosed one? Does he still have that big mole? Well, I don't quite remember. He looked fierce and cold-blooded. Did he have a big nose? I don't know. I don't think he had a mole. You might actually be a survivor. Elder, how do you know about the Zado's guard captain? At her question, the elder gave a weird answer. Well, I don't know him. What? Then why are you asking me these questions? I was testing you out to see if you were faking as a survivor. Looking at how Leona was thinking hard to answer his questions, the elder started asking her more, and as soon as he heard the answers, he nodded his head grimly. A pack of giant wolves, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, but it's true. A man-eater appeared because of the corpses, and here's proof. Sin pulled out a couple of man-eater tentacles from the void storage, and he also pulled out some teeth he took from the giant wolves when he left Zado. You wouldn't have been able to hunt down the giant wolves in such a short period of time. On top of that, a man-eater. Did you actually hunt the man-eater? I sure did. I won't ask for more money as long as you pay what's promised. Very thankful for that. Man-eater, what is going on? The elder had to believe Sin's words because the giant wolf's teeth, and a somewhat burnt man-eater tentacle, weren't items one could earn in a short period of time. The elder nodded slowly, took out the reward from the safe, and placed it in front of Zin. Well done. If the giant wolves were finished off, there is no need to flee at point. Thank you again. Zin opened the bag, counted the chips, and nodded his head. 200. Perfect. And this is a small token of appreciation for finishing off the man-eater. It could have gone all the way here. The elder took out an additional 50 chips and gave them to Zin. I'll take an extra reward any day. Thanks. This is a much better outcome than trying to look for a new shelter. Thank you, I really appreciate it. You've brought some convincing evidence and finished the job perfectly. Even in my nest days, I've never seen a hunter like you. The elder laughed, knowing that one of his biggest concerns had resolved itself. The elder looked and smiled lovingly at Leona, who looked happily back at him. So you must be the kid who'll be our new family member, right? Can I really live here? We've got plenty of rooms, land, and not enough workers, so your presence is very much welcomed. Wow. Leona became excited as the elder easily accepted her to live in the point. In a community village, kids were usually unwelcome because they were considered a burden. In some villages where the leaders were powerful, the leader would prohibit childbirth to prevent wasting food on kids. Leona understood the reality of living in the wilderness, and she kept on nodding with her hands clasped. Now, she would not have to worry about stealing or of dark, scary nights. With that fact alone, Leona felt glad. Mr. Elder, I will do my very best. Well then, I must go and prepare a welcoming feast. The elder looked at Zin. Why don't you settle here as well? We need a hunter, and a hunter of your caliber is always welcomed. Mr. Elder, Zin may look weak, but he's the real deal. I'm living proof of that. Leona whispered to the elder, but Zin shook his head. If you were in the nest before, you'd know better. Yes, right, that's a shame. Elder sounded regretful, but didn't bring it up again. Do not hold back a hunter. A hunter who didn't wander was not a hunter. A hunter should not stop. Instead, a hunter must always be on the move. A hunter must journey past the wilderness to arrive at their final destination. There was no reason to live in such a way. But hunters had their rules and convictions. The elder slowly nodded and looked at Zin again. And when he saw Zin, the elder's look changed, as well as his words. A hunter who lives by the rules. Indeed, I have met a very noble one. I believe there should be at least one fundamentalist. Zin laughed as he spoke. I urge you to rest for a couple more days. We have plenty to offer you. No, I'll be leaving soon. Zin smiled bitterly, and spoke again. I never dwell in a good place for too long. Right, I remember that rule as well. Never dwell in a good place for long. Otherwise, one would end up settling down. Because it became harder to leave, hunters tended to pass by good places. A hunter always watched out for good people, good villages, comfort and calmness. The biggest enemy of a hunter was not the biggest monster, but an environment that compelled them to settle down. A hunter was done for if they could no longer wander around. Leona did not understand the conversation, but was aware that Zin and the elder were having a discussion. Please leave. I hope your path does not lead back to this village. It was a farewell to the departing hunter. I wish to not return as well. It was a farewell from the departing hunter. I want this place to remain a place where a hunter is not needed. I'd also like this place to remain peaceful. After saying farewell, Zin took the reward and left the elder's building. The elder did not come out, but Leona followed after Zin. Are you leaving right away? Yes. Really? That's not good. Not good. What do you mean? Well, you could have stayed a little longer. Why in such a rush? Leona scratched her face with mixed feelings. She was able to live in a new and safe village, one with a high wall. She was able to come to this place because Zin had brought her here. And that hunter Zin was about to leave the village. A hunter is a human too, you know. Why don't you take a break? It seemed like Leona had something to say. But she ended up mumbling the words and then bit her lip. Zin looked at the little kid and thought about the past. There were memories, allusions, reminiscence, and reiteration. They were all moments in life that ended up as regrets in the end. If my goal was to settle down somewhere, I wouldn't be living as a hunter in the first place. Quote ellipsis quote. You've got some talent. That's a compliment, right? Yes, but, Zin said slowly, in this damned world, a person's the happiest when they don't have to use their talent. Zin had felt strong emotions ever since he accepted the mission from Ardpoint, and he believed that he had to remove himself from them. This is a safe place, and you will live a life that doesn't require your talents. In that case, you won't be living an unlucky life. Although Leona was a vicious person, it would not be bad for her to live her life farming instead of killing people out of viciousness. It had only been a couple of days, at most. 4 days of fighting and walking. However, relationships can form pretty easily in this world. Humans hate other humans, but they needed each other in the end. Leona looked at Zin with a heavy heart. Mister, you talk with big words, Leona added. Because it's hard to understand. Leona continued. Can you stay here and explain to me what you mean? It wasn't clear what moment or event had given Leona a tingly feeling. The stray cat that wasn't attached to others probably felt something in her heart when she started to talk with someone for the first time. It was as if she finally realized that the feeling she had all this time was loneliness. She was growing afraid of being lonely after having someone to accompany her. Sin shook his head. Big words are not necessary to live in this world. Sin turned around and added, so, just live the way you are now. Leona didn't cry, and the two weren't close friends yet. But Leona hoped to get to know him better. She hoped to talk a little bit more. Sin raised his hand and headed towards the prison's wall. Leona murmured, looking at Sin walking away. He's totally an amateur. A hunter left with his back to everyone. A hunter disappeared, leaving people behind. And therefore, a hunter did not turn around to look behind his back. Damn, I hope you break your foot while walking. Leona shouted. Sin left Hardpoint without meeting back Gu. He left hastily. After all, a hunter had nothing to do with the village after all the work was finished. Hunters looked for requests, and it was against their code to stay at a village that had no work for him. Sin had to visit different villages to resolve their issues, and earn more chips in order to prolong his life. He passed several mountains, stopping when Hardpoint was no longer visible. Sin knew that he was rushing himself. It was okay to rest up for about a day. Living by the code was a matter of belief. As Leona said, it was okay to rest for a bit as a human. Sin traveled through the darkest hours. Along the way, he met people that he felt worried about. He passed by villages that he felt concerned for. Because he came across these people in villages, he rushed ahead even more. A hunter needed to live alone. He had no friends or companions. A hunter who didn't live by himself were more prone to dying, and it was not a matter of living by the code, but a matter of surviving. Back Gu would live as a good captain of the guard. He wasn't book smart, but he was street smart. He would protect the point very effectively. The elder Ko-ine cited the safety of the people as his top priority, and was willing to spend about 300 chips in order to save the village from danger. Although he was quite old, but so long as he lived, Hardpoint would be a peaceful place. Leona was the most special kid that Sin had ever met. A very strange kid. Sin was able to describe Back Gu in the Elder in his own words, but it was hard to describe Leona in simple terms. However, Leona's good traits that appeared as bad traits should help her live in Hardpoint. A hunter would never settle down. If chips were offered, a hunter would find homes for the homeless, would assume revenge for others, and would kill monsters. And once all matters were resolved, a hunter would leave for a different place. One would gather chips to make a weapon, and use that weapon to hunt down a monster to gather more chips. In this never-ending cycle, the hunter wandered in the wilderness for their final destination. The hunter would keep on walking until he arrived at their journey's end. Sin knew about the power of time more than anybody else. A hesitation of the mind was temporary. Love the chip more than anything else. Many codes had led the hunter to this date. Defending something was harder than hunting for something. Holding on to something other than oneself always brought pain for sure. In the end, because hunters were human beings as well, they couldn't always live by the code. After experiencing many failures when trying to defend his dearest things, Zin realized that closing one's heart was the only way to avoid pain. Hunters who'd been around for a while were cold-hearted and didn't get sentimental towards anything. As Zin looked around, he realized something. In front of him was the compass. East, west, south, north. Walking from the east, Sin had to pick one direction, west, south or north. But he wasn't sure where he had to go. If he walked south, he would reach the tip of the Korean peninsula, and if he walked north, he would reach the broader continent. I need to head back. He had no reason to remain in the Korean peninsula. Even though it had been a while since he'd been to the peninsula, the land was rather peaceful. And Zin was certain that he wouldn't earn anything out of this peacefulness. Should I go through the continent and head to Southeast Asia? Yeah, I should. If Xin were to end his lifetime by resolving different requests along the way, the journey would take over a year. Xin was planning to travel leisurely since he didn't think that the apocalyptic world would lead to another apocalypse. He had another 400 plus days of lifetime, and death was still far for Xin. I should stop by Ragnarligen. Xin started to pick up his pace. He pondered what he should work on when he arrived at his next destination, which was still far away. Xin walked for 2 straight days without sleep. There was no real reason for it, but he kept on walking without rest. Quote. And at one point, Xin realized that something was not right with him. I am walking northwest. He had focused solely on walking, but instead of walking north he was heading to a different direction. Xin corrected his direction and started walking again. He must not have noticed because he was trying to get rid of all the random thoughts in his mind. Experiencing a human's hospitality after such a long time proved to be a very troubling matter. Xin smiled bitterly as he had mixed feelings in him. And he kept feeling anxious from time to time. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Xin felt as if he'd forgotten something very important. But he couldn't remember what it could be. That thought kept on popping in his mind ever since he left Ardpoint. Xin felt as if he couldn't figure out which part of his body was tingling. He had a feeling that he forgot about something important and had passed it by. Xin stopped and started murmuring. Do I have dementia? There was fear in his voice, which was very unlike of him. Xin had lived for a very long time. And it was not strange for him to have dementia. Even though he didn't appear old on the outside, his core was considerably aged. And it would not be a surprise to find that his brain wasn't normal. Did I age to the point where I need to worry about dementia? What a blessing. Although Xin didn't do it often, he spoke in a monologue. Xin tried to laugh it off, but he just couldn't smile naturally. It was very obvious, but it wasn't easy to remember something that was forgotten. Xin walked helplessly. And at that moment, vroom, a loud engine noise reverberated from far away. Xin immediately hid in the bushes. Vroom. The loud noise was coming from a couple of miles away, and it seemed to be getting closer and closer. Xin slowly moved from the bushes. He stayed still and observed the horizon. He spotted several beat-up cars approaching. Vroom. The noise was coming from beat-up reactor cars. The car bodies were made up of scrap metal. The tires were made up of pieces of rubber tangled with wires. These reactor cars sometimes had 3, 2, or even 4 wheels. Some had driver's seats, and some didn't. But these cars had different looks, and they were like ticking time bombs that could blow up with the drivers at any moment. Junk wagon. It's possible that someone in this peninsula would even build that crazy piece of junk. Perhaps it's from the continent. The junk wagon imitated the vehicles from the past, but they had pretty good speed. One with a crappy reactor since they used a powerful fuel, the blue chip. Just as Xin handled firearms, other people had technical skills in a world where the use of such skills was rare. And just as a hunter invested all their money and technology into hunting weapons, there were those who focused their energy on vehicles. They were the crazy group of individuals who were the enemy of all people. Reavers. They had the traits of a robber, murderer, thief, raider, and looter. Even though they were not monsters, they enjoyed murdering people more than a monster would, and no monsters or humans remained alive on the paths they passed. Reavers were obviously cruel in nature, and the junk wagons moved at a speed faster than a person could walk. From time to time, some wanderers would steal these junk wagons to travel. However, Xin did not prefer to ride on junk wagons. Crash. Ag. One of the junk wagons seemed to hit a bump on the road, jumped up, and exploded in midair. A junk wagon was literally made with junk, and they were very unstable and unsafe. It was not Zin's preference to ride on a ticking time bomb. And a hunter was in a position to detect enemies first, but not in a position to alert others with a loud engine noise. In any case, a jinkwagon was something that Zin really hated. The Reaver inside the exploding jinkwagon flew and hit the road, dying a horrible death on the spot. Halt! Halt! As soon as the head of the Reaver group shouted, all the Reavers stopped at once. It was not hard to spot the leader of the Reavers. They either led the pack or rode nicer jinkwagons with ornaments like skulls. Among the group of about 30 Reavers, there were 3 leaders. On one of the car-like jinkwagons, there were dozens of skulls dangling on its hood. Sin observed the group from the bushes. They don't have guns, but they have high-powered weapons. They are not from the peninsula. Sin made an analysis by observing the leader and the group's weapons. Inside the trunks of the jinkwagons, there were a bunch of rocket launchers. Did that dude just die? I think so, sir. Go take the engine and parts. If there's useful scrap metal in the next town, we'll build a new one. As soon as the leader finished speaking, a couple of Reavers ran towards the dismantled jinkwagon. They were not interested in their dead companion. Stroking his beard, the leader shouted at the Reavers looking at him. Who's got no car? As soon as he shouted, 10 Reavers raised their hands. The leader grinned and pointed at one of them. You already have a car. Boss, it's shameful to even call this a car. You can consider me carless. I don't think so. Hey, over there, Boomshake, you're up next. Oh, boss, thanks. Thank you. Boomshake, the Reaver, was so happy that he screamed at the top of his lungs. As soon as the Reavers put the usable parts into their jinkwagons, they started their engines. Vroom, vroom. Before leaving, the leader grew mad and shouted at the Reavers. You piece of crap. If you think your car's about to explode, stop. Don't die like an idiot. If a bomb went off, we'd all be dead. Be careful. Understood? Didn't you just tell us that if we stopped, it would disrupt the formation? What? Oh, never mind. Let's go. You moron. Let's go. Who knows? We might find something valuable like liquor during a stop. Even if we did, wouldn't you, boss, drink it all? What's the point? Now, you little punk. I'm going to get you. Oops, I'm going ahead, boss. Stop, you punk. Vroom. Revving their engines, the group of Reavers left. The things they left behind were tire marks, scrap metals, and a corpse. Sin waited behind the bushes until the Reavers left and stood up. Reavers are so noisy wherever they go. The Reavers appeared to be idiots goofing around, but one shouldn't take them lightly. For the victims, they would rather not encounter Reavers who lucked jokingly about whether they should kill people by cutting off their arms or legs. The Reavers were cruel, and Zin tried not to pick a fight with the Reavers, avoiding them at all cost. There were many reasons for it. With the following 4 in particular, Reavers usually formed groups, and confronting them would require using a lot of ammunition. Reavers were humans, and he could not extract chips from them. The jinkwagon's loud noise attracted beasts. When Reavers thought that they were losing the battle, they would self-destruct with their jinkwagons. They would rather die than give up their chips. Sin hated fighting against Reavers because it wasn't cost-efficient. Wait a minute. That way. The Reavers had gone over the curvy roads and were no longer visible, but he could still hear the sound of their engines. Sin was heading north, while the Reavers were heading south. Hardpoint was on their way. It was very likely that they wouldn't find Hardpoint, but the jinkwagons delimited routes in terms of the roads that they could operate on. Just as Zin had taken the northern route, they would also take the southern route. That would mean that the Reavers would eventually reach Hardpoint. Zin started heading north with a hardened look. A hunter did not act as a person of justice. A hunter worked for the number of chips he could get. Similar to how a hunter would shooting without hesitation when he encountered wanderers and refugees in the wilderness. A hunter displayed no emotion during the hunt. Hunters were not good people, and Zin did not care about the villages that he had no more business with. And so, Zin kept on heading north without turning back, even though he knew what would happen to Ardpoint. Zin neither thought nor said anything during this time. He only kept walking forward like a machine. Zin walked for an unknown period of time. Now I remember. Zin turned back. Turning from north to south, Zin started heading down the southern route. The reason he turned back was simple. He finally remembered what he'd forgotten about. As soon as he figured it out, his thoughts became clear and he was able to set his destination. I didn't get my reward. He didn't recover the 500 chips from Leona. Zin headed down south to recover the chips. Zin was thinking that the chips were the only reason he was heading back south. Zin had never made such a mistake in the past. It showed how quickly he'd left Ardpoint. He'd left in a hurry, to the point that he forgot about getting the reward. Zin had walked 80 miles north for 2 days. Zin walked without sleeping, so he traveled a fair distance. And it took about 10 hours for Zin to head back the same way. Zin ran at a very fast pace, his stamina was monstrous. The sky turned dark, as well as his surroundings. Zin paused. He was near Ardpoint and could see the moonlight illuminating the prison wall. Tiring, that was all he said after running for 10 hours. Instead of resting, he observed the walls of Ardpoint. It was too quiet. It must already be over. Zin was able to see what happened. He stared at the walls of Ardpoint and stood still. It wasn't hard to figure out what happened. The gate is broken. The heavy steel gate was crushed. A Reavers rocket launcher would be enough to destroy the gate. It seemed like there was a battle, and Ardpoint had ended up overtaken. Zin didn't have much feeling about the fact that the Reavers had overtaken Ardpoint. The guards of Ardpoint were only armed with arrows, while the Reavers were heavily armed. Ardpoint had no chance. Although all the people would be dead, Zin came back to retrieve his share of the reward. The unclaimed reward would still be there even though the people were dead. And Zin was going to take back his chips, even if they were taken by the Reavers.